When we look at information, numbers, percentages, statistics, we tend to have an easier time understanding and interpreting them if they're also represented by corresponding visual cues. Kibana Canvas is a tool that helps us present our Elasticsearch data with infographic-like dashboards, fully visual, dynamic, and live. A Kibana Canvas presentation is a bit like a PowerPoint presentation. We could generate bar charts, plots, and graphs or fully customized visualizations to showcase pertinent data that addresses specific needs. But Canvas goes way beyond PowerPoint. Kibana Canvas extracts whatever live data from our Elasticsearch cluster we need, processes it to prepare it for our visualizations, and then generates the graphical representations that we define. The first step in Canvas is to create a so-called work pad, which is basically a workspace where we build the graphical representation of our Elasticsearch data. Work pads can be composed of a single page or multiple pages. You could think of these pages as dashboards. Within the pages, we add graphical elements to represent the data any way we need to. Let's go through a few examples of the elements that Kibana Canvas has to offer. Charts, which include area, bubble, coordinate, donut, bar, and other types of charts. Shapes and text boxes that are formatted with Markdown, which is a plain text formatting syntax. Images that can either repeat a number of times based on dynamic data, or the image can be revealed based on the data they represent. Other supporting elements such as drop-down filters or time filters, which give us a way to limit what data is considered for graphical representation. For example, we can select to only include data inserted in the last month. This means we can create work pads that change their content on the fly based on user input, making it more of an app-like experience. Each element needs a way to extract the data that will be represented. The data source an element can use includes Elasticsearch SQL queries. The SQL syntax gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of what data we want to pull from Elasticsearch and how we want to present it to Canvas. Temelion expressions to work with time-based data, or raw documents pulled directly from indexed documents. Everything that's happening in Canvas is driven by the custom expression language, in a similar way as Kibana Temelion. We chain-defined functions by piping results, which are also known as contexts. Piping simply means that we take the result from one function and send it to another function to be further processed. All of this gives us a lot of freedom in choosing how to extract the data we need and transform it in a way that is usable and meaningful for our infographics. Here we have an example of a custom expression for Canvas. In this example of a metric element definition, we can see that it begins with the element filters to ensure that any global filter defined in the workpad, for example a date picker, will also apply to this element. Next, ES-SQL is specified as the data source, which then defines an Elasticsearch SQL query. The math function calculates the value for the metric that will be displayed. Here it simply passes the value of count documents, which as its name implies, will calculate the total returned documents from our defined query. The next line, starting with the metric word, defines the element type we want to use along with its formatting. To get a more in-depth look at Temelion functions, check out the Core Logics article on the topic at the URL on your screen, which also includes a summary of Elasticsearch SQL functions for quick reference. Well, that covers the basics of how Canvas works, so now let's learn how to create our own Kibana Canvas workpad and see what it can do for our users. So to get started with this exercise, we need to get some sample data to work with, and we'll accomplish this with the Nginx web server log provided by Elastic. And now to save you some typing, I've uploaded the commands you're going to need for this to the web. So just head on over to media.sundog-soft.com/es/canvas.txt to get this little cheat sheet here. So we'll start by downloading the log from the GitHub repository with the wget command. So let's copy that first line. Control-C, back to our terminal, right-click, and we have our data. Next, we need to convert the Nginx JSON logs file with awk to a form that can be processed by the Elasticsearch bulk API, and then the converted file is saved as Nginx JSON logs bulk. Let's take care of that. Control-C, right-click. That was quick. All right, next we need to create our index, our Nginx index, and the basic mappings that we need. We especially need to map Nginx's timestamps to a date-time format. so they can be understood and used by Elasticsearch. So let's go ahead and copy that block there. Control C, kick that off. All right, and finally we'll actually index the data using the bulk API. Note here that we're using the system version of curl because we need a custom content type here for XND JSON. Also note that we're going to be piping this into the JQ utility. So if you don't already have JQ installed, first you need to install it with sudo apt install JQ. And with that in place, we should be able to copy and run this command to actually index our data. Control C again. And off it goes. All right, so what we're looking for is that message false in the output. That means that there were no errors. That's what that pipe to JQ looking for .errors did at the end there. So that means we're good. That's successfully uploaded with no problems whatsoever. So let's switch gears back to Kibana here and head over to localhost :5601. And if you did do the previous exercise where we set up a different space, you'll just want to go back to the default one here. Now in Canvas, we'll often use Elasticsearch SQL to retrieve the data for our visualization. So to prepare our queries and test out different variations, we can use Kibana's dev tools. So let's head on over to that. In the menu here, under Management is Dev Tools. And from here, we just need to wrap the SQL query we want in a simple JSON object and then post it to the _SQL API endpoint. And we'll also need to add !format equals text as a query parameter to our post request to see the returned result in a nicely formatted text table. So let's paste in an example here that I have sitting in my clipboard already. We're going to do a little SQL query to select some bytes as total transferred from Nginx, group by remote IP, order by blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it's just a straight up SQL query there. And by using the DevTools screen here, we can very nicely enter that in and kick it off and see the results on the right here. So while working with elements, you can click on an expression editor, and that gives you a much more flexibility in changing how elements work in Canvas. After you get more comfortable with the expression language used in Canvas, you'll notice it's a more efficient way to work rather than using the interface and clicking on buttons and menus to edit various functionality. So let's create our first workpad in Canvas and learn how to build an infographic based on the Nginx log data that we just imported. So first let's navigate to Canvas. That's under Analytics Canvas. And let's create a new workpad. So in the top left corner above our workpad, we'll notice the Add Element button. Let's click on it, and that should give us a list of available elements. So let's add a new shape element here from that list. And we'll use that to create the green background for the right side of our infographic. So let's open up the display section over here and find the Fill button. And we'll use the following color code to get the shade of green that we want. It's pound 0B974D. All right, that looks good. And now it's time to add our metrics on the right side. But first let's drag this box over here and get it roughly the right place that I want it to be. It's going to be a little sidebar here of various metrics here that we want a quick look at. All right, so to do this, we're going to add a new element and select the metric type from that list. Add element, and it's under chart, and from there we should see metric. All right, let's drag it into place. And after we drag it where we want it, we're going to change the metric and label text color to white. So we're going to go to metric text here, change that to white. And also the metric label, change that to white. All right, finally we get to the most important part, that's bringing in the data from our Nginx index. So after we select the element that we want to work on, in this case the metric we just added, look in the right pane of Canvas for the selected element. Now we're going to switch from the Display tab to the Data tab and change the data source to Elasticsearch SQL. So now we'll use the following SQL query, which will return the total number of documents in our index. That will be select count star as count underscore documents from Nginx. Now after hitting the save icon, we're going to see this warning sign on the screen. So this metric doesn't yet have a source value to use to display the data. So to fix that, we're going to go back to the Display tab and select the value of count documents. All right, so count underscore documents was generated by that SQL query that we just entered. And we should also enter the text logs as our label. So what we're going to do is clone this element to quickly add similar ones. So to copy this element and use it as sort of a starting point for the others that we want to add to this little sidebar, one thing you can do is just select that element and go to Edit and select Clone. You could also just copy and paste it with Control-C and Control-V. So I'm just going to do that. Let's add in a total of 4 of these things. And I'll make sure they're all nicely aligned. I'm not a graphic designer, unfortunately. All right, so let's go through each one of these and fix their SQL queries and their labels to reflect what we want. So let's click on this second one here and go back to the Data tab and change that query to select sum of bytes as bytes from Nginx. Save that. And back to the display. We'll change that value to bytes and change the label to bytes transferred. And for the next one, we're going to change that one's data source to select count distinct remote underscore IP as remote underscore IP from Nginx. Save that. And change the display to the new remote IP value. And we'll change that value to unique IPs. And finally, for the last one here, for the third new metric, we're going to change its data to select count distinct agent as agents from Nginx. And again, change its value to the new agent's value and change its label to reflect what it really is, which is unique agents. All right, so yeah, for each one, we followed the same procedure. We just pointed the value field to use the column resulting from our SQL query, and we changed the label of each metric. And this one doesn't quite fit, right? Let's make that a little bit wider. Oh my, it's a really big number, isn't it? I have to change the font size on that one, actually. So that's easy to do. We'll just change the metric text from 46 and see if 36 is enough. Yep, that's better. All right, let's talk about image and image repeat element types. We have 2 image elements in our infographic as well that we want to add. The first one will be used as a logo. So to add the logo, we're going to add an image element and then change its link to point to a place where we can get the logo from. So add element, image, image. And we're just going to change the link to point to a place where I happen to know the Nginx logo exists. So we'll change that to link and paste in the following URL. And if you want to go and grab that yourself, that is the URL that we're retrieving right now. So if you want to copy over that URL into that field there, that should take care of it. There we go. All right, let's put that up in the corner here. Next, we'll add an image repeat element. And we'll put that down here. And as the name suggests, this repeats the defined image for a number of times based on underlying data. And similarly, image reveal shows a portion or a percentage of the image based on underlying data. So let's use this simple globe icon from Wikipedia that I just scaled down to fit in that infographic here. If you want to go ahead and take that URL, and we're going to take that and put it in the link for image URL. Cool. And now we need to use the same SQL query in the data section that we used for our unique agents metric to represent the number of unique agents graphically using an image repeat field. And let's give that a little bit of a border. So going back to data, works the same way, demo data, Elasticsearch SQL, And we will change this to select count distinct agent as agents from Nginx, and save that. And just like with the other metric, we need to change the value to the new agents value. And there we have it. Very cool. So now the globe image should appear 136 times. Count them if you don't believe me. Pretty cool. But there's a lot more. So next let's add some text elements. So add element text. And we'll put the first one up here on the top. So after inserting the first one, we're going to navigate to the display section and just replace that markdown with the following. Thusly, and we'll apply. All right, let's tighten that up. And we'll add another one as well. Text. And the markdown for that will be as follows. And we'll tighten that up as well. All right, so now we need tables to go underneath both of these headers. Line them up as best I can here. So now it's time to add the two data table elements. Now the first one's going to display our request statistics. So let's go ahead and add a data table. Under chart, data table. All right, so now we need to enter the following SQL to select the data that we want here. So back to the data tab on this, we're going to change that to Elasticsearch SQL, and we're going to enter the following SQL command. I'm going to cheat by copying and pasting it, but feel free to pause if you're following along. Cool. So what that SQL is doing is selecting the data we need, grouping the results based on the request field, and ordering them in descending order according to the count of requests. So we're getting the most popular requests here, basically. Now for nicer formatting, we can go to the display section and hide the pagination, and also hide the column header. That's better. All right. Let's just get everything to fit where it belongs. So our second table will be similar. Add element, chart, data table, and put this down here where it belongs. And we will change its data to an Elasticsearch SQL expression. And again, if you want to pause and type this in yourself, now would be the time. But that is the SQL content for our data source. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's go ahead and make that pretty as well. We will also disable the pagination and the column headers. All right. Very cool. All right, so the final element that we'll add are the charts. Let's move this over to the right here to make room for it, because there is plenty of room for that. And we're going to move this chart a little bit to the left. So we're going to put a chart version of this data here and also here. All right, so let's first add the horizontal bar chart to visualize the request statistics from our table. So we'll just add an element, chart, horizontal bar, and put that roughly where it belongs. And we will change its data source thusly. All right, basically the same thing as the table. And now we need to link it with the data returned by the query. So back to display, we're going to change the x-axis to value and change that to count requests. And for the y-axis, we'll set that value to request. And now we also need to disable the axis label so we can actually see things here. So to do that, we'll add chart styles for that. X-axis. Turn those labels off. Y-axis. Turn those labels off. Cool. All right, let's try to get this to line up with the individual rows here. Very cool. All right, and under the default style, we'll pick a green fill color so it's consistent with the rest of the design. So let's change that color from auto to that lovely shade of green. That's close enough. All right. All right, let's take this even further using Canvas expressions. So we'll apply this to a new element that will add a progress gauge chart. So under Add Element, we're going to go to Progress and add a progress gauge. And let's move this down here. Now this progress chart is going to show the percentage of traffic transferred to the top 5 IP addresses. So after inserting this chart element, we're going to apply the following SQL to its data section, which is basically the same thing as that table. Data, change that to Elasticsearch SQL, and change that to the following. Again, feel free to pause and type that in if you want to. Let's save that. And this query, unfortunately, is not enough on its own. That's because the progress gauge chart expects a single value between 0 and 1, where something like 0.56 would represent 56%. So we're going to achieve what we need with the useful expression editor here. So I'm going to click on the expression editor link here in the lower right-hand corner of the screen here. And basically I'm going to replace that math expression with my own. And I'm just going to paste this in again. Feel free to pause and type that in yourself if you wish. And when you're ready, hit run. And now we can close that and see that our gauge is working with a value of 43%. Let's also choose the same green color fill that we used before and maybe pick a bigger font size too. Back to display. Let's change the color to green. And for the progress bar itself, let's change its color to green as well. And if we want, we can bump up the font size too. Cool. Looks pretty good. All right, so there we have it. We've constructed a working dashboard here using real log data using Kibana Canvas here. And you could spend some time to pretty this up a little bit more if you wanted to, but it's an actual dashboard. We've used a bunch of different element types and it's looking pretty good. So let's just clean up our mess and make sure we can continue with the next lesson in a clean environment. So let's remove the changes that we created in this lesson. So back to our terminal prompt here. First, let's remove the nginx log files like so, rm nginx_star. And then we can remove the index where we save the nginx sample log data with curl -- request delete localhost :9200/nginx. And finally, we'll remove the workpad we created in Kibana Canvas. So to do that, we'll go back to Canvas here and select my Canvas workpad and delete it. All right, we're all cleaned up and ready to move on.